Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Geopolitics Explained podcast. My name is Dylan. This has been recorded on the 19th of January 2024. In the last episode, we discussed the Houthi rebels and developments in the Red Sea. We've also seen other developments, specifically in Africa, that will also affect the Red Sea. Now, Ethiopia is the most populated landlocked country in the world. And because they're a landlocked country, something that they seek is ocean access. A few weeks ago, Ethiopia made a deal with Somaliland to recognise the territory in return for ocean access. There are certain developments within geopolitics and the countries surrounding the area that I'll discuss today. So, firstly, I stated that this is a deal. The language here is important. This is a Memorandum of Understanding between Ethiopia and Somaliland. Now, a Memorandum of Understanding is a statement of serious intent. Importantly, it's not legally binding. So, this can be reversed, but it is symbolic that both Ethiopia and Somaliland want to move forward with this deal. Somaliland isn't recognised by any other UN member, but it maintains diplomatic relations with some countries. Importantly, one of which is Taiwan, who has their own territorial dispute. And so in an effort to support their own territorial disputes and independence claim, it's natural that Taiwan is going to support a lot of other independence and territorial claims worldwide. Hence why Taiwan supports the independence of Somaliland. Now, some people might be wondering, what is Somaliland and why does it want independence and where does it want independence from? To fully understand this situation, I'd recommend finding yourself a map of the current area of Ethiopia, Somaliland, and Somalia. Now, I'll start in the 1960s. Like most situations, the British had pushed themselves too far from home and then realised that they were too stretched, their power was waning, and they needed to pull back. Somaliland used to be named British Somaliland, but it was granted independence in the 1960s, and Somaliland formed a union with Somalia. This new state was called the Somali Republic. Now, the constitution naturally favoured the south, which is modern Somalia, and unrest grew in the former British Somaliland. It didn't take long before the Somaliland and Somalia War of Independence against a military junta that was currently ruling in Somalia in 1969. This military junta in Somalia collapsed in January of 1991, and many of the clans within former Somaliland, including the Isak, Dulbahante, Issa, Gadabursi, and Warsangali clans, signed Somaliland's Declaration of Independence. Now, this Declaration of Independence importantly included that Somaliland's borders would be the same borders as British Somaliland, when it was established in 1884. This importantly crossed over with Somalia's claims on the land. So, to summarise, Somaliland wishes to be its own independent state. Somalia claims the land as their own territory, where Somaliland wants to exist. It's another example of a former colonial power leaving an area, and the natural power vacuum that's left behind leads to greed and fighting, as many of these newly established states, when former colonial powers left, seek more and more power and more control over the future of their geopolitics. Recently, there has been more conflict, specifically in the territory claimed by Somaliland. Now, if you remember back to when I discussed the clans that signed the Somaliland Declaration of Independence, one of those clans was the Dhulbahante clan. In February of 2023, the Dhulbahante clan elders declared that they wished to secede from Somaliland and form a state government with Somalia called SSC Khatumo. This led to a conflict between Somaliland and SSC Khatumo, which eventually led to SSC Khatumo taking control of the disputed territory. For anybody interested in more information on this conflict is named the Las Anod conflict, since that's the region, the state that these two factions are fighting over. When SSC Khatumo took control of the disputed territory, a few months later, in October of 2023, the government of Somalia officially recognised SSC Khatumo and its administration. This is a blow to Somaliland, seen as the territory and the administration that's been recognised by the Somali government. From Ethiopia's point of view, they're currently in a tough economic situation. Now, if you look at statistics such as gross domestic product, GDP, it looks as though the state is growing quite nicely year over year. But when you consider GDP per capita of just over $1,000 per annum, it's clear that there's a problem there with purchasing power for individuals in Ethiopia. Now, one promising element for Ethiopia is if you take a look at its population pyramid, the life expectancy is rising, and the largest sections of the pyramid are the base. Now, currently, this youth isn't contributing to the economy, but if opportunities are provided for this youth to increase productivity and provide further growth to the Ethiopian economy when they enter the workforce, this could be a tailwind for the Ethiopian economy. But the important element of this is that this youth in Ethiopia need the opportunity through job creation, through investment in infrastructure, to be able to provide this tailwind to the economy and help contribute to Ethiopian growth. For obvious reasons, Somalia is angry at this deal. They recalled their ambassador from Ethiopia and stated, quotation, "We are ready for war." Now, This leads to a few questions. Firstly, does Somalia have the capabilities to take on Ethiopia? If we consider the size of Somalia and Ethiopia's armies, Somalia has an army of 20,000 troops. Ethiopia has an army of 130,000 troops. This is quite an imbalance. Ethiopia has its domestic issues. There's fighting in the Tigray region, the Amhara regions, and the Amhara regions. But Somalia also has its own domestic issues with the Sunni Islamist group Al-Shabaab. Another element of this is that Ethiopia aids peacekeeping in Somalia through the African Union, and has done in the past with interventions in various conflicts in the past in Somalia, most notably in Somali conflicts between 1996 and 2003, and 2006 and 2009. This, to me, paints a picture that Somalia clearly cannot take on Ethiopia militarily alone. But an important element of this is that most of the world backs Somalia. As I discussed earlier, Ethiopia, in this Memorandum of Understanding, if it went ahead, would be the first state to recognise Somaliland, UN member to recognise Somaliland. No other UN member in the world does. Which means that many of the world's biggest nations and most influential nations, the United States, the African Union, the EU, the Arab League, Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt, all support Somalia and have told Ethiopia to respect the Somali sovereignty, which includes the want-to-be breakaway state of Somaliland in this sovereignty. This leads me to the conclusion that there will be no moves or negative impact against Ethiopia. I think in the region that they're in, they're too strong militarily. So the only pressure that can be put on them is if other states oppose this deal enough that they wish to intervene. Now, intervene doesn't mean militarily. It could mean political pressure. It could be diplomatic pressure. But I don't think this happens either. We've discussed in my blog posts since the start of January that superpower geopolitics is going to take a break this year. This started at the APEC summit between China and the United States, which I believe will become, over time, one of the most significant geopolitical events of this period, definitely of the last few years. Now, with superpower geopolitics taking a break, there are many elections coming up this year, and any state who has the capacity to intervene in an issue like this, firstly, is preoccupied with their own domestic political situation, or has bigger issues to deal with. Look at the US currently dealing with the Houthi rebels, for example. They're already occupied. There is nobody who's going to get involved in this situation between Ethiopia, Somalia, and Somaliland. Now, even though nobody, in my opinion, is going to make a move against Ethiopia, what could be done is Somalia or SSC Khatumo, the breakaway administration, could show further aggression towards Somaliland. The question then becomes, if Somalia or SSC Khatumo show enough success in their moves against Somaliland, would Ethiopia come to their aid? I think that's a question that can't be answered right now, but it's definitely something to consider. This has been another episode of the Geopolitics Explained podcast. If you like what you heard in this episode, the previous 2 episodes have discussed the Houthi rebels and the current conflict in the Red Sea, and the border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana over the Essequibo region. If you feel so obliged, leave this podcast a 5-star review. You can also find more of my work over on Substack at Geopolitics Explained. You can also find me on Twitter, Medium, YouTube, TikTok, all the main social media platforms at the same name. If you have any questions about any of my material, the best place to find me is Substack. You can leave a question on any of my posts and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. A quick side note before we end this episode. Nobody can read the future. The one thing that I try and do is scenario analysis. I'll consider all the potential scenarios that could unfold in the future, and I'll discuss the ones that I believe are the most likely to occur. If you have any other potential scenarios that you'd love to discuss, then again, head over to the Substack, leave a comment there. I'd love to discuss more with you. This has been the Geopolitics Explained podcast. I've been Dylan. I'll talk to you next time.